Sir, step away from the vehicle. ID, now.
I'm thinking about my own car. What's the problem, officer?
Suspicious behavior. Government building. High-value vehicle. Don't argue. ID.
I'll cooperate, but explain what's suspicious about walking.
The voice came sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet rhythm of the street. Sir, step away from the vehicle right now. The man froze for half a second, then slowly turned his head. His hands were empty. His posture was relaxed. The afternoon sun reflected off the windshield behind him, casting long shadows across the courthouse parking lot. "I am standing next to my car," the man said calmly. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" The officer took 2 steps closer. His hand rested near his holster, not touching the weapon, but close enough to make the message clear. "We received a call about suspicious behavior. You've been walking back and forth around this vehicle. I need to see some identification." Traffic hummed nearby. A bus hissed as it stopped at the corner. Somewhere a phone rang inside the courthouse lobby. The man glanced briefly at the building behind him, then back at the officer. "I work here. I am waiting for someone. Walking in a parking lot is not a crime." The officer's jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the man slowly head to toe, as if looking for something that justified the tension already filling the air. "Sir, don't argue with me. This area has had issues. I asked for your ID." The man took a slow breath. He reached into his jacket carefully, deliberately, making sure the movement was visible. "I'm happy to cooperate," he said. "But before I hand over anything, can you explain what exactly was suspicious about my behavior?" That question changed everything. The officer's tone hardened. "What's suspicious is you standing around a government building near a high-value vehicle. If you refuse to comply, I can detain you, maybe arrest you." A few people slowed their steps. A woman exiting the courthouse paused near the doors. A man across the street raised his phone slightly, pretending to check a message while angling the camera toward the scene. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken. The man did not raise his voice. He did not step back either. "Officer, threatening arrest without cause is a serious matter. I am not resisting. I am asking a lawful question." The officer let out a short breath through his nose, a sound closer to irritation than patience. "Turn around and face the car, hands where I can see them. I'm not playing games today." For a brief moment, the only sound was the wind brushing against dry leaves along the curb. The man complied, placing his hands on the hood. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Calm face, steady eyes. No fear, only restraint. "You see this all the time, don't you?" The officer muttered almost to himself. "People who think rules don't apply to them." The man said nothing, but in his silence was something the officer didn't recognize yet. Not defiance, not arrogance. Something heavier? Something that would soon make this threat of arrest the worst decision of the officer's career. The confrontation in the parking lot did not begin there. It began decades earlier in places neither man could see from where they stood. The man with his hands resting calmly on the hood of the car was not someone who had arrived easily at this moment in life. He was born in a small Midwestern city, the son of a public school teacher and a factory worker. Their house sat 2 blocks from a railroad track. At night, the sound of freight cars rolling past blended with the hum of an old refrigerator and the quiet prayers his mother whispered before bed. From an early age, he learned to move carefully through the world, to speak clearly, to never give authority a reason to doubt his intentions. He excelled in school not because he was praised, but because failure was never an option. Teachers noticed his discipline. Counselors noticed his restraint. He learned quickly that being calm was not a personality trait, it was a survival skill. Law school came later, earned through scholarships, long nights, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. He clerked for judges who tested him harder than anyone else. He endured whispers about affirmative action, questions he knew were never asked of his white peers. He answered them all with preparation, with precision, with work so thorough it left no room for doubt. Years passed. He became a prosecutor, then an appellate judge. He wrote opinions that reshaped sentencing guidelines. He ruled against law enforcement when the Constitution demanded it, and against defendants when the law left no alternative. His reputation was built not on kindness, but on fairness. Not on emotion, but on restraint. When he was appointed to the federal bench, there was no celebration. Just a quiet acknowledgement that he had finally reached a place he had been preparing for his entire life. And yet, standing in that parking lot, none of that mattered. The officer did not see a federal judge. He saw a black man near a car outside a government building. The officer's own story followed a different path. He grew up in a working-class suburb where respect was measured by toughness and authority was rarely questioned. His father had worn a uniform. His uncles had worn uniforms. Becoming a police officer was not just a career choice, it was an inheritance. He joined the department young, eager, confident. He learned quickly how power felt when people listened to your commands, how compliance became automatic once a badge entered the conversation. He also learned which encounters ended quietly and which ones escalated. Over time, patterns formed in his mind, patterns that were never written down, never acknowledged aloud. There had been complaints. A few citizens claimed he was aggressive. A couple mentioned unnecessary stops. None of them stuck. Supervisors called him proactive, assertive, results-driven. Each time he walked away without consequence, something hardened inside him. He learned that instincts were enough, that hesitation was weakness, that backing down was losing. By the time he stepped into that parking lot, he believed deeply in one thing. He was the authority. And authority in his mind did not need to explain itself. 2 lives, 2 histories. One built on restraint and responsibility, the other built on unchecked confidence and silent reinforcement. They collided in a place neither of them had chosen as a battlefield, and the imbalance of power, real or imagined, was about to be exposed in a way neither could undo. The parking lot no longer felt ordinary. The officer stood closer now, close enough that the man could smell the faint scent of coffee on his breath. The man kept his hands' visible fingers resting flat against the warm metal of the hood. His voice when he spoke again remained steady. "Officer, I am not refusing to cooperate. I am asking you to articulate the basis for this stop." The officer scoffed. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Just give me your ID and we can figure this out." "I will provide identification," the man replied, "but I want it noted that I am being detained without a clear explanation. Am I free to leave?" That question landed like a challenge. The officer straightened his shoulders. "No, you're not free to leave, not until I say so." A woman near the sidewalk stopped walking altogether. She pretended to search her bag, but her eyes never left the scene. A delivery driver across the lot leaned against his van phone, lifted chest high, recording without trying to hide it. The sound of traffic faded behind the tension building between 2 men who refused to move. The man turned his head slightly, careful not to make any sudden motion. Officer detaining someone requires reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Standing near my own vehicle does not meet that standard. The officer's face flushed. "There it is," he said. "You think you know the law better than me." "I know the law," the man replied quietly. That was enough. The officer stepped back and raised his voice just enough for the people nearby to hear. "Sir, you are being uncooperative. If you continue to resist, you will be arrested." "Resisting what exactly?" the man asked, standing still. A murmur moved through the small crowd that had formed without anyone realizing it. Someone whispered, "This is crazy." Another voice followed. "He hasn't done anything." A woman near the courthouse entrance shook her head slowly, disbelief written across her face. The officer noticed the phones. He noticed the attention. His eyes darted briefly toward the onlookers, then snapped back to the man. His jaw clenched. The situation was no longer just about suspicion. It was about control. "Turn around fully," he ordered. "Keep your hands on the car." The man complied. Slowly, deliberately. Every movement measured, every breath controlled. He had learned long ago that speed could be misinterpreted. Calm could be misread. Silence could be dangerous. He chose his actions like words in a legal brief. The officer reached for his radio, clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch. I've got a non-compliant subject refusing to identify himself. Possible attempt to evade. Possible." That statement drew an audible reaction from the crowd. Someone spoke louder this time. "He's not doing anything. He's just standing there." The officer turned his head sharply. "Sir, stay back. This does not concern you." A man in a suit near the courthouse steps raised his voice. "It concerns all of us when you threaten arrest without cause." The officer ignored him. His focus narrowed. He had crossed a line now, one he could feel but refused to acknowledge. Backing down would mean admitting he was wrong. And in front of witnesses, that was unacceptable. The man spoke again, softer now but firm. "Officer, I suggest you call a supervisor before this goes any further." That suggestion felt like an insult. "I don't need a supervisor to do my job," the officer snapped. You people always think you can talk your way out of things. You people. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. A woman across the lot let out a short, stunned laugh. Did he really just say that? Someone else muttered. Oh, wow. Phones rose higher. No one was pretending anymore. The man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. He did not respond to the comment. He knew better than to react to bait. Instead, he focused on what mattered. Preserving evidence. Preserving witnesses. Preserving himself. Officer, he said, I am asking you one last time, what crime do you believe I am committing? The officer did not answer immediately. He hesitated just for a second. In that pause, doubt flickered across his face. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. Suspicious behavior, he said finally, and refusal to comply. The man nodded slowly, as if filing the words away, as if committing them to memory. Around them, the crowd had grown to nearly a dozen people. Some angry, some confused, all watching. The tension was no longer private. It was public, recorded, witnessed, and the officer boxed in by his own authority, and the eyes of strangers made a decision that would define everything that followed. The officer made his move without warning. Turn around, hands behind your back. The words landed flat, rehearsed, final. The man did not argue. He did not ask another question. He turned slowly, the gravel crunching softly under his shoes. His hands moved back, fingers interlacing exactly as instructed. The metal came next. The click of the cuffs was loud. Too loud. It echoed against the concrete walls of the parking structure, sharp and unmistakable. Cold steel closed around his wrists tighter than necessary. The pressure bit into his skin, not enough to draw blood, enough to remind him who was in control. A gasp came from somewhere in the crowd. The officer adjusted the cuffs, giving them a short practice tug. You are being detained pending investigation, he said. Any further resistance will result in additional charges. The man said nothing. His jaw tightened for just a moment, then relaxed. His eyes lowered to the ground as if he were studying the cracks in the pavement. Inside, his mind was already moving faster than the scene unfolding around him. Time, witnesses, statements, video angles. Someone spoke up louder now. This is wrong. He didn't do anything. A woman's voice shaking but firm. The officer ignored her. He guided the man toward the patrol car with a hand placed firmly between his shoulder blades. Not violent, not gentle, deliberate. Each step felt heavier than the last. The world seemed to narrow to small details. The smell of hot asphalt, the distant siren somewhere across town, the hum of a camera stabilizing as someone zoomed in. The back door of the patrol car opened. Plastic seat, no handles, no escape. The man ducked his head and slid inside. The door shut with a hollow thud that sealed the moment in place. Inside the car, the air was stale. Old sweat. Disinfectant. A faint hint of fast food. The man sat upright, wrists bound, shoulders squared. He stared straight ahead through the metal grate separating him from the front seat. Outside, the officer stood for a moment, hand on the door. His chest rose and fell a little faster than before. He glanced at the crowd, then away. He had crossed the point of no return. Whatever doubts had crept in earlier were buried now beneath procedure and pride. As the engine started, the man closed his eyes briefly. He did not feel anger, he felt clarity. He knew exactly what had happened. Exactly what had been violated. Exactly how this would unfold from here. In his mind, the legal framework assembled itself piece by piece. Unlawful detention. Lack of reasonable suspicion. Escalation without cause. The car pulled out of the lot. The crowd watched it go in silence. Phones still raised, faces tight with disbelief. No one cheered. No one clapped. There was no sense of resolution. Only the shared understanding that they had just witnessed something deeply wrong. At a red light, the officer glanced at the rearview mirror. For the first time, he really looked at the man in the back seat. Calm, unmoving, eyes steady, unmoving. Eyes. A flicker of unease passed through him. The drive to the station took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of silence. 12 minutes of blinking dashboard lights and passing streets. 12 minutes in which one man planned a lawsuit and the other began to realize that this arrest might not end the way he imagined. The holding area was quieter than the parking lot, but the silence felt heavier. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretched thin. The man sat on a hard bench, his hands still cuffed in front of him, now resting calmly on his knees. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable. The officer stood near the booking desk, filling out paperwork with more force than necessary. His pen pressed hard against the paper. He avoided eye contact. "What's the name?" the desk sergeant asked without looking up. The officer answered quickly. The man listened as his name was spoken aloud. Clearly. Precisely. No hesitation. The sergeant typed it into the system. For a moment nothing happened. Then the screen changed. The sergeant leaned closer. His fingers paused over the keyboard. He frowned slightly and typed again, slower this time. The room seemed to hold its breath. He looked up, looked back at the screen, then at the man on the bench. "One moment," the sergeant said. He stood and walked toward a door marked "Supervisors Only." The door closed softly behind him. The officer felt it then. That subtle shift in the air. The kind that comes before bad news. He swallowed and glanced at the man who met his eyes without a trace of anger or triumph. Just calm. Minutes passed. The door opened. A lieutenant stepped out, followed by the sergeant. The lieutenant's face was tight professional, but his eyes carried something else. Urgency. Concern. He walked directly to the man. "Sir," the lieutenant said carefully, "I need to confirm something. Could you state your full name again, please?" The man did, his voice steady, controlled. The lieutenant nodded once and turned sharply toward the officer. "When did you detain him?" The officer hesitated. "In the parking lot," he said. "Suspicious behavior." "Suspicious behavior," the lieutenant repeated slower now. He looked back at the man. "Sir, are you currently serving on the federal bench?" The room went still. "Yes," the man replied. "United States District Court." The officer felt the words hit him before they fully registered. Federal. Court. The lieutenant closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. He took a breath. A long one. The kind taken when a situation has already gone very wrong and there is no way to rewind it. The cuffs came off immediately. "I apologize, Judge," the lieutenant said. "This should not have happened." The officer's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His hands trembled just enough to notice. He stared at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at the man he had just threatened with arrest. The judge stood slowly, rubbing his wrists once, not dramatically, just enough to restore circulation. He looked at the officer now, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with disappointment. "You had every opportunity to stop this," he said quietly. "Every opportunity." The officer could not speak. The lieutenant straightened his uniform. "Judge, you are free to go. We will ensure this incident is fully documented." The judge nodded once. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand anything in that moment. He simply picked up his jacket and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the officer stood frozen. Because in that single revelation, his authority had evaporated. His assumptions had collapsed. And the consequences, still unseen, had already begun. The story did not stay inside the station. By the next morning, it was already moving faster than anyone inside the department could control. Video from the parking lot appeared online, first shaky but clear enough. A uniformed officer, a calm black man, raised voices, handcuffs. The patrol car pulling away while bystanders protested. By noon, the second video surfaced. A longer clip. Clear audio. The moment the officer said suspicious behavior. The moment he threatened arrest. The moment the cuffs clicked shut. The caption was simple. Federal judge detained outside courthouse. The reaction was immediate. Local news stations picked it up within hours. By evening, national outlets were calling the department's press office nonstop. Legal analysts replayed the footage frame by frame, pointing out every procedural failure. Civil rights attorneys dissected the stop with surgical precision. There was no ambiguity, no gray area, no plausible defense. The judge did not give interviews. He did not need to. The evidence spoke for itself. 2 days later, the lawsuit was filed in federal court. Unlawful detention, false arrest, violation of Fourth Amendment rights. The complaint cited timestamps from the video's witness statements, dispatch logs, and departmental policy manuals. Every claim was backed by documentation. The city's legal team reviewed the filing in silence. They watched the footage again and again. They noted the lack of reasonable suspicion, the escalation, the refusal to call a supervisor, the arrest without cause. One attorney finally spoke. "This is indefensible." An internal affairs investigation began the same week. Not quietly, not behind closed doors. Public pressure ensured transparency. Records were pulled. Prior complaints against the officer resurfaced. Patterns that had once been dismissed as isolated incidents now looked impossible to ignore. The findings were damning. The officer was placed on administrative leave, then terminated. The language in the dismissal letter was precise and final. Violation of constitutional rights. Conduct unbecoming. Failure to follow department policy. Loss of public trust. The city moved quickly after that. Settlement negotiations began before the case ever reached trial. The amount was never officially announced, but sources confirmed it was substantial. Enough to make a statement. Enough to ensure it would be remembered in training rooms and briefing halls for years to come. Reforms followed. Mandatory bias training. Revised stop and detention protocols. Supervisor approval required for certain detentions. Body camera audits conducted monthly instead of annually. The department issued a public apology not just to the judge, but to the community. The judge accepted none of it publicly. He returned to the bench without comment. Continued hearing cases. Continued writing opinions. Continued holding the law to the same standard he always had. But the impact remained. The video was used in law schools, in police academies, in civil rights seminars. It became an example not of outrage, but of accountability. A reminder that authority does not replace the Constitution, and that power, when misused, eventually answers to the law. The officer's career was over. The system had been forced to look at itself, and justice, slow but undeniable, had arrived. What happened in that parking lot was not a misunderstanding. It was a violation. Under the Fourth Amendment, law enforcement officers are required to have reasonable suspicion of specific criminal activity before detaining an individual. Reasonable suspicion is not a feeling. It is not a hunch. It must be based on articulable facts. Standing near a vehicle, walking in a parking lot, waiting outside a government building. None of these meet that legal threshold. Threatening arrest for refusing to explain oneself is also unlawful. Silence is not obstruction. Asking why you are being detained is not resistance. Courts have been clear on this for decades. A citizen does not lose constitutional protections because an officer feels challenged. This case illustrates how quickly vague language like suspicious behavior becomes a tool for abuse. When that phrase is not tied to specific conduct, it becomes a blank check, one that too often is written against people who look a certain way. There is also a deeper psychological layer at work. Implicit bias does not always announce itself loudly. It operates quietly. It fills in gaps when information is incomplete. When an officer sees a person and unconsciously assigns risk based on race, clothing, or location, every neutral action begins to look threatening. Calm becomes arrogance. Questions become defiance. Presence becomes suspicion. The danger is not just individual prejudice. It is institutional reinforcement. When prior complaints are ignored, when supervisors excuse behavior as proactive policing, when accountability only arrives after a video goes viral, bias becomes normalized. So what should an ordinary person do in that moment? First, stay calm. Sudden movements and raised voices are often misinterpreted. Speak clearly. Ask simple questions. Am I being detained? What crime do you believe I am committing? Second, document if it is safe to do so. Recording in public spaces is generally lawful. Witnesses matter. Video matters. Timestamps matter. Third, do not argue facts on the street. Courts exist for that purpose. Compliance under protest preserves safety without surrendering rights. And finally, seek legal counsel if your rights are violated. Civil accountability is not revenge. It is how the system corrects itself. This story unsettles people because it strips away comforting assumptions. If a federal judge can be handcuffed for standing in the wrong place, credentials are not the shield we think they are. The law is only as strong as its enforcement, and enforcement without accountability is not justice. The real lesson is not about one officer or one arrest. It is about vigilance, about understanding rights, about demanding that power explain itself. Because the Constitution does not protect people selectively. It protects everyone, or it protects no one.